Hi there, and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. You know, there are no shortage of headlines in terms of the transition of power in Washington, protests, and pontificating about the leadership of a President Trump. So we are going to narrow our focus a little bit and talk about the impact of a Trump presidency on Michigan, how potential policies will affect us here, and what President Trump will need to do to satisfy the Michigan voters who turned out for him. We'll also debate a possible Plan B for regional transit, and you'll hear from Domino's Pizza CEO Patrick Doyle, his thoughts on Michigan, education, and business. So let's get started with our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, how are you? It's good to see you. Yeah, it's been
ready for the year to be over.
Are you ready for the year to be over? Wait, you think it's going to be any less busy once 2017 starts?
I just need that last 2 weeks of the year where everything slows down a little and everyone's a little quieter.
Do you think everyone will be a little bit? Is that your holiday wish, or is that
no, well, it happens for me because I just leave. I just go away.
I had a new granddaughter this morning.
Well, congratulations, Papa. That is wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. All right, so there are good things to celebrate in the world, but there are also some very interesting things to talk over. And I think if you get through a lot of the headlines that we've seen coming out of the what will President-elect Trump's administration look like, I want to take a look at how any of his policies and any of the things that he wants to push through now, how it will impact Michigan. Nolan, if you take a look at some of the things that he's talking about, what do you think are the key things that's going to impact Michigan?
You know, I think there's reason for hope and reason for concern in his proposals. If he can deliver on tax and regulatory relief, it will help the Michigan manufacturing economy. I think if he can repatriate the tax money dollars or the revenue that's sitting overseas, I think that'll create a tremendous economic boom in the country and investment in hard assets, in manufacturing plants, et cetera. So I think that's the hopeful part. If he carries through on this threat to start trade wars with Mexico and China, that's going to be really hard on the Michigan economy. Mark Fields said in Los Angeles this week that 35% tariff he proposes on goods imported or on cars imported from Mexico would devastate the auto industry. And if the auto industry is hurt, the economy is hurt. Similarly, the 45% tariff on goods from China going to drive up the cost of everything we buy. I hope he can't get that through a Republican Congress and won't even try, because that would be really bad for the economy.
And hurting the working class men and women who are the ones who turned out, many of them, to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look also at the tax plans that he's put out, the income tax plans, most of the middle class would see a tax increase under Donald Trump's plans.
I'm not sure that's true.
And certainly some of the working class folks who turned out for him would also see that. The people who would get tax breaks are upper income earners who are, of course, now dominating the early days of this administration as well. This idea that somehow he's going to reform corporate taxes to repatriate that money, why would that happen when his chief economic guy is likely to be someone from Goldman Sachs, for instance?
Why wouldn't it happen? And why wouldn't Goldman Sachs want that money here? Everybody wants that money back. Barack Obama wanted that money back, and he wanted a lower corporate tax rate, never got around to pushing it through. Everybody wants that money to come back here. It's being double taxed, and if it comes back, but as far as the tax plan I saw was
there's a place you can go online, put in your income and see what happens. Try it. I mean, it's an astoundingly high number that you get to before you get to a tax break.
What I saw proposed was a increase in the personal deduction to $25,000. If you get that, you've got any couple making less than $50,000 would pay no taxes, and a big chunk of the middle class would see big reduction.
You got to go to the
that
calculator.
Goes through.
And
who's running? I'd have to know who's running the calculator.
Tax policy is really complicated, and this is the thing. I mean, this is a guy who's offered push-button answers to complex questions, and when you sort of add that complexity to what he says he wants to do, you see that what he says is going to be the effect is probably not going to be.
You know, and a lot of people who voted for him, and not just in Michigan, but around the country, were saying, you know, we need jobs and we want more jobs. And in the job creation, we haven't quite heard, the plans from him on that. And that's not very easy. When he's talking about maybe big infrastructure projects, I'm not sure that's totally in line with the Republican Congress that he's going to be working with as well.
Well, I mean, he is proposing major infrastructure projects, and that represents jobs. Keystone Pipeline represents jobs. But also, if you untie these regulations from the economy and free up businesses to invest and to grow, I think you create jobs that way. We are under a huge regulatory burden in this country. It's something like 70,000 new pages of regulations each year over the last 4 or 5 years. That's choking off growth. And if you could unleash that and let the economy grow, I think that creates jobs.
Yeah, it may, but it can also create disaster. Let's think about what happened here in the state of Michigan. One of the first things that Governor Rick Snyder did was loosen up regulations around Department of Environmental Quality, for instance. He disinvested in that agency. One of the first things out of the gate was saying, we don't need this to be so involved in everything. Well, where did that agency fail us? That agency failed us in Flint. Failed to identify
But not from
what was going.
understaffing.
Well, from lack of investment. Well, I mean, you cut the money, and we have the worst environmental disaster in the history of the state. The idea that those are somehow dissociated is absurd.
Since you did bring that up, I mean, it also bears repeating that Donald Trump has talked about making the EPA just an advisory,
yeah, right.
Great
advisory
we'll
have Flint's
department.
All over.
Well, and it's also something to think about when you're looking at the state who lives right on the Great Lakes.
You ask any farmer who's had to live under their thumb, and you know it's easy to sit here, you know, in an urban area and talk about the EPA. You want to know why he did so poorly in rural areas. The EPA can be faulted. If you have a farm, if you're a farmer, you don't own or control your land at all.
So again, there's this delicate balance between the idea of over-regulation and consumer citizen protection. The government's first obligation is to protect its citizens. That failed us here in the state of Michigan, in Flint, because of the kind of disinvestment in regulatory schemes. All I'm saying is if Donald Trump follows the same blueprint that he's talked about, that Governor Snyder talked about, we are likely to see the same kinds of effects, the same consequences.
These agencies have all been about protecting government power and expanding their own authority. If you look at Dodd-Frank, for example, Dodd-Frank, we've known it's not working. This Democratic Congress refused to change it. It's keeping the home market down in Detroit and other urban areas, harder to get loans, harder for small business. Community banks have all but died off under Dodd-Frank.
But the repeal of Glass-Steagall was what led to the housing crisis. So, I mean, this idea that somehow deregulating the market makes things better is not always true.
Dodd-Frank certainly wasn't the answer.
Well, it was part of an answer.
Urban areas and rural areas alike.
It needs fixing. It doesn't need repealing.
It probably needs repealing.
I'm going to pull you back around to some of the other things that Donald Trump is talking about doing once he comes in office that could impact Michigan. And I want to look at immigration, where he's talking about deportation. You know, there's also fear among the Arab American community and the Muslim community that he's going to make people register. And I think that could have that's a grave impact on people here in our state as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a throwback to the 1930s. When we were talking about, they're talking about this in Europe with Jewish citizens, and then we did it here in this country during the Second World War with Japanese citizens. I mean, these are arguments we've had before, and these are shameful parts of our past that today most people would say, well, gee, we shouldn't have done that. That was not in concert with the ideals that this country supposedly was founded on. This is a guy heading us back in that direction to reopen debate about obviously, I think, unconstitutional kind of behavior. But even if you don't think it's unconstitutional, it's not American.
Is there cause for concern here, Nolan, or do we need to see
That's why we were concerned throughout the campaign with that rhetoric. I'm looking at what he's been saying since he was elected president. The immigration ban suddenly disappeared from his website. The other day on Leslie Stahl's interview on CBS, he said, well, let's concentrate first on deporting the 2 or 3 million criminal illegal immigrants we have in this country, and then we'll figure out the rest later. Well, that's exactly the same policy the Obama administration has been pursuing, deporting criminals and leaving everybody else alone. So I think you're going to have to see how he carries this out.
You've seen the advisors to his transition team said just today that they are already preparing for this registry, this Muslim registry, that they're going to ask Muslim immigrants and visitors to this country to register. So don't pretend like they've just walked away from this stuff. They haven't. And the bigger issue is that we haven't seen enough people stand up and say, this is un-American, right? Mike Rogers, wonderful congressman from the state of Michigan, was part of the transition team, walked out this week saying that, you know, I assume he saw something with regard to foreign policy that bothered him. What he should have said was, look, these are also people pursuing bigoted policies that contravene the Constitution of this country.
He got tossed out. He didn't walk out. Mike got tossed out in a power struggle. He was a supporter of Trump all along. I don't think he's going to turn on him now.
Well, and that's one of the problems inside that
I'm
party.
encouraged. You know, there's a lot of worrisome stuff there. I'll agree with you. This is not my guy. But I'm encouraged to see Paul Ryan still in place in the Congress. I think he's a reasonable check on presidential power, and I think the last thing you're going to see, or should see, Donald Trump do is start throwing around executive orders after accusing Barack Obama of abusing that power.
They all do that.
So we'll see what the
Name the last president to resist
we'll see
that.
what the congressional leadership does. Bill Clinton didn't do it.
Sure
All right.
Not much.
All right.
That was expanded under Bush and Obama.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave that one there.